Welcome to the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show with your host, Lisa Miller. Lisa is an entrepreneur, inventor, advisor, and founder of Vi Healthcare Consulting, the leading healthcare advisory and analytics firm, helping hospitals accelerate their margin improvement goals. Lisa loves to think differently and collaborates with leaders and their teams to solve challenges and to create new, innovative approaches that impact the clinical and business side of healthcare. Our show will bring you leaders and innovators within healthcare and across multiple industries. Be a part of the discussion that will give you a unique perspective, deep insights, and roadmaps to successfully help you navigate the clinical, financial, and operations of healthcare. Your show starts now.
Hello, this is Lisa Miller, and this is the Healthcare Leadership Experience. I am so excited as this is our first show on Healthcare Now radio, where we are going to be on every day, Monday through Friday, 5 a.m., 1 p.m., and 9 p.m. So I encourage all my listeners to check out Healthcare Now radio, where there is a whole suite of phenomenal healthcare podcasters. And I am thrilled for this opportunity. So today, I'm here again with my podcast producer and marketing strategist, Lisa Lauder. And just like we did on last show, Lisa's going to interview me on predictions for 2022. And if you missed last week's show, she asked me all about trends in healthcare. So go back to episode 28 and listen in. And I'd like to wish everyone a very happy new year. I hope you had a great time with your family and friends and a time to relax and do the things that you enjoy to do. And I appreciate that you're listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to hand this over to Lisa Lauder to ask me some questions.
Well, it's so good to be here and to be embarking on another year. I'm always so nostalgic at the beginning of the year, thinking about all the things that I want to plan and accomplish. I hope, Lisa, that you had a really happy holiday season with your family as well.
I did. As you know, I have some big shifts in my personal life, but all things are good. Family's doing well. And, I'm also very excited about the new year. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on the past and kind of reset and look at the future and get excited about new goals and things we can do in our personal lives and in our businesses, right?
Absolutely. And as we look to this new year and, reflect on the year that has passed, I'd love to talk about what you perceive as being a new normal in healthcare and some of the predictions that you have for your industry. There's a lot of things going on in the media and the news right now that are going to impact business and healthcare. And so let's start by talking about supply chain. How do you anticipate supply chain challenges will affect hospitals, if at all?
So I think there's a lot of aspects that the supply chain will have on healthcare, and probably we could have 2 or 3 podcasts on this, but I think there are a couple of things that really jump out at me. And I think it's really around hospital planning, preparedness, and being anticipatory. So there are a couple of things. We have some hospitals that are looking to have backups, not just in the exact item that they have, but how do they have alternatives, substitutes? So they have a second alternative, third alternative, and it's really their ability to go into their data, mine their data, look at back orders, look at the things that are most challenging for them, pivot, and say, okay, we need to have substitutes for these items. You don't need substitutes for everything. You need to focus on the substitutes that are giving you the most challenges or that they're high priority. So I think it's, again, looking at your data and how do you protect your organization from those challenges? Because you can always look back historically to see those challenges. We should be looking at back orders. We should be looking at those problematic items and how do we become anticipatory going forward?
I love that. The idea of having a backup to the backup to the backup plan. It's
Yeah.
smart.
Plan B, plan C, plan D. It's definitely plan B. So that's very important. Now, the second order of consequence, because of having a plan B, is this will cost hospitals more money. And so there needs to be some cushion and some planning around that increased cost in order to protect your supply chain. And so, number one, how do you budget for it? And how do you put a dollar value to it? Because again, you can go to your data and you can put a dollar value to that. And number two, how are we going to fund it? And, of course, the best way to fund those types of planning and preparedness is through, mining that through cost savings or utilization savings, or looking at ways to, shift, from, an excessive inventory and moving that down, or again, looking at your data and ways to cost shift, in the sense that there's probably some unnecessary spend, some unnecessary cost that you need to really double down on, and then move to protecting your supply chain. And I think there's two other areas. Of course, innovation is important, and collaboration. What are those things, those items that you can buy that maybe you can manufacture regionally with another hospital or maybe a startup? I know that some of this is being done with GPOs, and I get a little worried about that, because we then move to this, again, over-reliance on a GPO, and where I love to see hospitals more self-reliant, more collaborative, maybe with, again, a startup or maybe a manufacturer that isn't in healthcare that wants to pivot and move into healthcare. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic. And so what does innovation play? And then looking at reusables. There's always been some controversy over reusing reusables, but I think hospitals have to look at that more and more as a viable option to protecting their supply chain. And of course, high performing contracting will be required, right? Just really looking at contracting as the vehicle to provide that margin improvement.
I love that. When you were talking about hospitals collaborating on manufacturing, it made me think that somebody should start an HPO, a healthcare purchasing organization, so that, hospitals really can maximize their buying power together. What about the impact of inflation, Lisa? I mean, we heard all kinds of stories around Thanksgiving and Christmas about the cost of the family dinner. What do you think the impact of inflation is going to be on hospitals? And what are some of the things that healthcare leaders should be doing or can be doing to mitigate this risk?
Yes. So there's a convergence of all these aspects of inflation. So, of course, it's supply chain, it's higher costs, it's the labor shortages. So we are going to be really significantly impacted by inflation. And, there's certain areas like food costs, material costs, labor costs, distribution costs. All these costs will start impacting hospitals. And so there's a kind of a multi-strategy approach to this, right? So legitimately, vendors are going to have costs that they're going to pass on. However, some of that may be a little opportunistic, and the hospitals have to balance the reality of what's real versus what may be an overarching reach to get higher cost and to push out the vendor's margin. So hospitals have to really protect their own margins. They have to be able to push back a little bit. And maybe this is the time that vendors are going to need to give a little bit more and maybe not pass through everything. This could be the time that it's not, let's push through everything to the hospitals, because I don't know where hospitals are going to get this. They can't charge more money. And so, the hospitals are going to have to get maybe a little more tougher and a little more pushing back. And the vendors may have to have a little bit thinner margins for the short term. And we are in a different industry. And I think the industry we're in is healthcare. And we all need to be contributors to the success of patient care. And so there are other areas that hospitals can look to kind of mitigate and protect. And the protection is going to be around measuring and monitoring, capturing opportunities in real time, no longer looking back and saying, oh, wow, we missed that opportunity 12 months, 16 months ago when it happened. And now we've had this year of overspending, overutilizing. They need to do things in real time. And that has to be a must. You've got to put this real time view into expenses to capture opportunities, capture errors, variations as they happen. So if you're just tuning in now, you're listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show on Healthcare Radio Now. I'm your host, Lisa Miller. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Lauder, my producer, and we're talking about 2020 healthcare predictions and specifically what has worked for hospitals and what has been their challenges. This show is sponsored by Vi Healthcare Consulting, the leading healthcare advisory and analytics firm helping hospitals accelerate their margin improvement goals. Vi has collaborated with healthcare leaders and their teams to accelerate their strategic initiatives and improve their financial performance by over $1 billion since 1999. So, Lisa, I'd like to continue this interview that you did last show, and we're continuing now on fiction. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I really enjoyed hearing what you said about inflation and the things that hospitals really need to be thinking about and considering for the future. I think that's so valuable, especially, the convergence that you talked about and the whole measuring and monitoring. It's definitely you're bang on there. So let's talk about the next thing that we're hearing. I'd love to get your prediction on this. There's so much talk of the great resignation. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the things you expect healthcare leaders will do or need to do to retain their best healthcare workers? Or is this even a thing?
Yeah, I think it is a thing and then it's not a thing. But, I think this is an aftermath of COVID and people wanting a different way to work. Some good, not so good. We need to be in collaborative environments, person to person, to be effective. And it's not to say that you can't work from home or we can't care about a person's preference about working. But I do feel like we lose a lot of innovation and collaboration and creativity working from home, working remotely, and there needs to be time together. I know that is so valuable here at Vi. But, in terms of the great resignation and people shifting and the focus on engagement is about listening to them, listening to their ideas, listening to what they want for their careers, giving them growth opportunities, giving them opportunities to learn, right? Making that a priority. Where would you like to learn? What things and skills would you like to learn? And, this where they can showcase their expertise or showcase their successes. You want to build a team of thought leaders. And, people want growth, they want to learn, but they also want to have pride in their career. And I think that's really important for healthcare leaders to give their teams and their employees ways to shine, ways to grow. And this is a big one. I love intrapreneurship, right? So we've all heard of entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship is developing entrepreneurs from within the organization. And I have an upcoming chapter in a book on innovation that I'm writing about entrepreneurship, but it's a win-win really for hospitals because there's lots of entrepreneurship that's going around in your hospital. And how are you capturing it? And how are you spreading it through the organization? Or how can you share that even further outside of the organization? But, we're creative just by our nature. And, how are you engaging that creativity with your employees and communicating and allowing their ideas and their views to be heard? I think that's going to be a big, important part of employee engagement. It's not all about money. It's about time off and it's about flexibility, but I think it's about their contribution.
I love that. And I love intrapreneurship. I think that, if we've learned anything through, the last couple of years of COVID, healthcare frontline workers are courageous and innovative. And I'm sure that from an entrepreneurial perspective, they will be able to contribute lots of great big ideas for the future. So, speaking of frontline driven innovation, how do you predict this will change at all next year, if at all?
Well, I'm going to start with a little quote from a book I'm reading. I love it. It's called Big Little Breakthroughs by Joss Linker. And he says basically 77% of economic growth comes from small advances, right? So instead of shooting for a $10 billion IPO or a Nobel Prize, the most effective innovators focus instead on something much smaller. According to Harvard University professor Stefan Thump, 77% of economic growth is attributed to small creative advances, not radical innovations. So these small innovations are huge to an organization, and it requires frontline driven innovation. So how do you as a hospital develop those frontline innovations? And it's not a suggestion box, it's a process, and it really has to be set up in an environment that allows communication, whether or not, we want everyone to be heard. We don't like what they're saying. We still need that, those environments. And I'm going to tell you some of the greatest ideas are these small innovations, and they can really grow, or they can be enhanced, by team environments. And really, they're the fuel of your future. And so, I love the show Undercover Boss. And I don't know if you ever watched it, Lisa.
Yes, I love it too.
It's like one of my favorite shows. And some of these really big corporations, their CEOs are, going undercover, and they're doing all these jobs, which I think it's a great model for healthcare leaders to do, not doing it, say, hey, look, I'm going to work down in the food services today, and everybody follows them. It's no, going undercover and really doing different jobs. And there's so many insights that come from it. They don't realize that their retail technology at the front, isn't working, or they don't realize that they used to have a good training program and now they don't. I mean, they uncover so many insights, and they learn about their frontline people in such a empathic, way. And it really brings the company closer, and you become a different leader when you're leading and hearing from the front line. So I love that show. I think everyone should watch a few more episodes, but when you lead, hearing from the front lines, you're going to get insights that are so powerful.
It's like nothing like on the job training, undercover or not, to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. To see the CEO of like a home security company trying to put in the home security systems, and they can't use a drill. But then all of a sudden they realize that the workers don't have the proper equipment, or all these things that that are uncovered. And also the great stories about the people that put their trust in their companies. So how do we go from these large scale initiatives and push them out to the front lines? And I think that's something that should be on every healthcare leader's mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do you believe the future of strategic advisors and consulting firms like yours and the role they play in helping hospital executives will look like? What do you anticipate or predict that we will see in the future with that?
Yeah, I think what I'm watching a lot of right now are all these interesting, innovative examples about how hospitals, or for that matter, any companies, companies are utilizing advisors. And I want to take a step back. And if you think about athletes like Tiger Woods, or, whomever, is a top athlete, Serena Williams, they have 4, 5, 6, 7 different kinds of coaches. They have a food and nutrition coach. They have an agility coach. They have a mindset coach. They have all these coaches. And, there's some learning in there in terms of, well, we need strategic coaches, for strategic initiatives, and we probably need some, mindset or some professional coaching too. So I think that, sometimes hospitals, I've heard both sides. I've heard, we definitely need to bring on some advisors. We need some specific skill sets, and we don't have them here, and we need to bring them on. And then we've heard, well, we really don't like consultants in this organization. So, and I understand both sides of it. And maybe it's the word, or maybe it's, unfortunately, some bad results that have been achieved. But I think there's value in very defined initiatives, right? Moving away from these enormous initiatives where a company comes in and they're looking at everything. They're looking at, labor, reimbursement, expenses, and it's just this ginormous initiative, and it's mammoth. And it's very hard for the healthcare organization to kind of move through this mammoth exercise versus having these defined, very specific approaches, these sprints, right? And they have a specific purpose, and there's a goal attached to it, a financial goal, operational goal, and we've got more of those. So using specialists, not generalists, less reliance on GPOs to do everything. I love fractional positions. I mean, we often think about fractional positions as a fractional CFO or a fractional CMO, a chief marketing officer, but you could have fractional project managers. You could have fractional data analysts. So maybe you can't hire a full-time data analyst, or maybe you just want to hire a consultant for a role for a year, or maybe it's 1/3 of a data analyst. So it's thinking differently. And I think that's the future.
I love that. I love the fractional positions, and I love really thinking about the specialists because, you use sports. Well, if I'm someone who is a triathlon, I'm not going to get the swimming instructor to teach me how to ride my bike better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's just a lot of that where, you have this big generalist consulting firm in, and they're doing a specific initiative, and they're like, oh, we can do that, or we can do that, or, and then the consulting company is going out looking for that person versus I want the specialists. I want the best of the best. We have a problem to solve. The problem to solve is reimbursement. The problem to solve is cost. The problem to solve is we need help with an implementation. We need a phenomenal project manager. So I think we've really got to look out into the industry to see who's best at what they do. And I'm seeing that, really the next step. And there's all these kind of opportunities, different services where you get a gig employee for a specific reason, right? You may want an SEO specialist. You may want a website specialist, right? But not one company that does everything. You may look to, break that up or, infuse that in with the services, that you're getting from that company. So it's needing help also with critical thinking, strategic thinking, maybe negotiation support for a specific contract or, managed care contract, but looking to bring in specialization for a specific reason and, getting that outcome and then, moving on to different initiatives. But I definitely think that's the future. And the last thing I will say on that is that your VPs and upcoming leaders, do need coaches and mentors. They need business thinking coaches and mentors. They can get the expertise on the clinical side, but they need business coaching. They need entrepreneurial coaching. They need advisors that are going to help them maneuver and, just, giving them priorities and talking through, what's going on for them day to day. But I actually think that will be hugely successful for hospitals and really being aware that their VPs and upcoming leaders need mentors.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. Super helpful.
So, Lisa, this was an exciting first show on the Healthcare Radio Now network, and I appreciate you being a part of this first episode. We have so many new episodes coming up with interviews from VPs of finance to supply chain to CFOs. We have Carol Turano coming on board to talk with us about how to align an initiative, how do you align it, people change management, and how do you work through that process. We have Dr. Nilda Perez talking about behavioral health innovation. We are having a month of innovation conversations. And next week, I'm really excited to have Drew Lerman. He's a VP of Finance out Southwestern Vermont. Healthcare is a long and successful career in finance. There's an upcoming book called It's Nobody's Money, and you will want to hear this interview. We're super excited about that. Episode 28 is on trends, and that was last week's episode. I encourage you to listen, and we love your feedback. So please email me and let me know what you'd like to see us cover in 2022, and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation there. And I wish you a very happy new year and lots of success and happiness. And thank you for listening to the Healthcare Leadership Experience.
Thank you for joining Lisa Miller for this episode of the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show, sponsored by Vi Healthcare Consulting. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe so you can automatically get notified when new shows premiere weekly. Don't forget to leave us a review so more healthcare leaders like you can discover us. The show is on Healthcare Now, Radio, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, and other major podcast platforms. To reach out to Lisa personally, you can join the conversation on LinkedIn, where Lisa continues to have discussions on the business of healthcare. You can find links to Lisa's other social platforms in the show notes or at vihealthcare.com. The Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show is the Think Differently communication for healthcare leaders, and we are honored to have you tune in. Join us next week for another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Experience radio show.
Hi, this is Leah. You are listening to my mom's podcast, The Healthcare Leadership Experience.
Hi, this is Fernando. If you would like to speak with my mom, just email her.